In Dungeons & Dragons, characters can progress all the way up to level 20, but regardless of what class you are, all spellcasters cap out at level 9 spells. We see much higher magic effects from gods, monsters, and many more sources from the lore that have magical effects that we never see represented in the spells. In 3rd edition, there is content that goes beyond level 20, and therefore going beyond 9th level spells. And today I'm going to be going through the top 5 most powerful spells that 3rd edition mentions that you can inspire and put in your 5th edition games. For the most part, a lot of these magical effects will work the same, but I'll also try to give an example of how they could be transcribed into 5th edition. So without further ado, let's get started at the 5th most powerful spell, Living Lightning. Now, when you look at the end result of Living Lightning, you see just 10d6 points of electricity damage, which does not seem like an epic level spell, or even something like a 9th level spell in D&D. But getting into this spell, Living Lightning, it becomes very interesting, as it is a sentient and generally friendly spell. It has mental ability scores and senses the world through your own senses and communicates with you by thought. It is technically a self-triggering spell, and it isn't truly alive, but it is a fragment of your own personality. Now, I won't get into all the fine details of 3rd edition, but essentially, it is a 5-foot wide, 300-foot long bolt of lightning that casts itself and acts on your own initiative. This takes concentration spells up to a new level for something in 5th edition. It is almost like this is an extremely powerful familiar with one ability, and that is casting a pretty powerful lightning spell that can hit as many creatures that can fit into this 300-foot long space. Very powerful, but at the end of the day, not really game-breaking as far as spells go in D&D, and I think that this could be an interesting add into 5th edition. This next one is much more on the defensive side, and it is Eternal Freedom. This has to be cast by 10 spellcasters, who can contribute a 9th level spell slot to the casting, in addition to the main caster who has to use an epic level spell. You can cast this on any subject, and that subject now can boldly go where others fear to tread, becoming permanently immune to the following specific spells, effects, and spell-like abilities: Entangle, Hold, Imprisonment, Paralysis, Petrification, Sleep, Slow Stunning, Temporal Stasis, and Web. Again, this is a little bit difficult to transcribe into the context of 5th edition, as there are a lot of these spells in 5th edition, but I think we can easily look at some higher level beings in D&D and their condition immunities and just apply that in the scope of 5th edition. So this would just give someone immunity to ever being any type of stunned, petrified, or paralyzed. The reason this spell is so powerful is its permanent effect. It is pretty costly, and it does require 10 spellcasters that can have the ability to cast 9th level spells, but enabling a creature to almost never be hit by any sort of effect that would stun it or render it unable to move. And this is an ability you see in a lot of bosses, because the ability to paralyze or stun with something like Hold Monster or Hold Person can turn an interesting and difficult boss encounter, smacking them for free on a couple of turns and having the attackers win the encounter. So Eternal Freedom is very powerful in the end, having a permanent effect. The 3rd spell is Verdigris Tsunami. This is finally where we see some huge damage numbers. Essentially, it creates a tsunami of grass, shrubs, and trees that overgrow the area like a tidal wave. These plants crawl and creep across everything in the area, and staring and coiling it as if it had been growing there for a century or more. Creatures in the area will take 40d6 points of damage. Buildings are also engulfed and take the same points of 40d6 damage. Anything destroyed is uprooted and walls crumbled. This plant growth is a permanent effect and has an area of 1,000 feet radius. You can cast this from 1,500 feet away, meaning you can essentially destroy a city and all of its inhabitants with this spell. This does a lot of damage and would kill most any regular thing, doing an average of 140 damage to everything in the area. This one is pretty easily transcribed into 5th edition, doing the same amount of damage and just having a dexterity save for all creatures in the area. This is the first spell that I think we really see city-ending scale. Our 4th and 2nd most powerful spell is the most powerful weather effect that I have seen in D&D, and that is Dire Winter. Essentially, you summon winter. The creature or object you target emanates bitter cold to a radius of 1,000 feet, for 20 hours. The Emanated Cold only deals 2d6 points of damage per round against unprotected creatures, but you have to remember this is per round in an area of a 1,000-foot radius. It goes on for 20 hours, so any creature caught in this entire 1,000-foot radius will almost certainly not make it out unless they have some sort of teleportation ability. This one is very similar to the Verdigris Tsunami, but much slower over time. You can block off entire areas from any creatures that you don't wish to enter, and if you have some immunity to cold damage, you can stand in it unchallenged. This one again is on a city level ending scale, with anyone left in this radius certainly due for death. And finally, the most powerful epic level spell in all of 3rd edition, and therefore D&D, is the Vengeful Gaze of God. The target is only one creature, but this spell unleashes a fury like unto heavenly wrath that deals 305 d6 points of damage. If the target is reduced to -10 hit points or less, it is utterly destroyed as if disintegrated, leaving behind only a trace of fine dust. The catch to this spell to dealing 305 d6 damage, or an average of over 1,000, is that the caster themselves takes 200 d6 points of damage, as your eyes bleed and your skin convulses when such a power is released. This spell often kills the caster, but it's often worth it. Well, that is definitely up for debate, but this can pretty much kill any one singular being. In 5th edition, none of these statted out monsters, even the ones of CR 30 like a Tarrasque, comes close to 1,000 hit points, most of them ending at around 700. There is a saving throw associated with this, so it does give some of the creatures a fighting chance, but odds are whatever the subject of this spell is, it is destroyed. I will say, I don't know if the caveat on the end of the 200 d6 points of damage done to yourself is worth it. This almost will kill you, certainly unless you have some sort of backup plan. And it doesn't mention that the caster themselves are utterly destroyed as if disintegrated, so theoretically if you have access to epic level spells, hopefully you know someone that has access to a Revivify spell. Transcribed into D&D 5e, again, this just does straight damage, and you do get some sort of con save. And I compare this to D&D 5e monsters, this would take out most D&D 5e monsters, and even though a lot of the gods aren't statted in 5th edition, I do think this spell has a decent shot at least mortally wounding a lot of deities that appear in 5th edition. So that is 5 of the epic level spells in D&D 3rd edition, and how you can apply them to 5th edition. I don't think any of these are game-breaking. I honestly think Wish might be even more game-breaking than a lot of these. And I would love to see more 9th level spells in D&D, so if you as a DM thinks any of these spells are reasonable enough to be 9th level spells in D&D, go ahead and add them to 5th edition, or give your player something to work for. I will add the caveat that in 3rd edition, to develop these spells is upwards of 1,000,000 gold pieces, multiple weeks or months, and the ability to cast a lot of other spells, even to develop these epic level spells to cast in your games. So let me know what you think of these spells, and check out the epic level handbook if you want to see the rest of the 3rd edition spells that I did not mention. Thanks everyone for watching, I appreciate it. Have a good one.